A reading from the first letter of Paul to the Corinthians. If I speak in the tongues of mortals and of angels, but do not have love, I am a noisy gong or a clanging cymbal. And if I have prophetic powers and understand all mysteries and all knowledge, and if I have all faith so as to move mountains, but do not have love, I am nothing. If I give away all my possessions, and if I hand over my body so that I may boast, but do not have love, I gain nothing. Love is patient. Love is kind. Love is not envious or boastful or arrogant or rude. It does not insist on its own way. It is not irritable or resentful. It does not rejoice in wrongdoing, but rejoices in the truth. It bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. But as for prophecies, they will come to an end. As for tongues, they will cease. As for knowledge, it will come to an end. For we know only in part, and we prophesy only in part. But when the complete comes, the partial will come to an end. When I was a child, I spoke like a child. I thought like a child. I reasoned like a child. When I became an adult, I put an end to childish ways. For now we see in a mirror, dimly, but then we will see face to face. Now I know only in part, then I will know fully, even as I am fully known. And now faith, hope, and love abide, these three, and the greatest of these is love. The second reading is taken from the Gospel of Mark. One of the scribes came near and heard them disputing with one another, and seeing that, he answered them well. He asked him, "Which commandment is the first of all?" Jesus answered, "The first is, 'Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one. You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your mind and with all your strength. The second is this, you shall love your neighbor as yourself. There is no commandment greater than these." I speak in the name of God, love that is the source of all being, Jesus, love enfleshed in human form, and the Holy Spirit, love aflame within our hearts. Amen. This passage from the letter to the Corinthians is very well known. Often it is chosen to be read at weddings. It is given a romantic connotation, as if intended for use as a guideline for intimate relationships. It has been quoted extensively and appears on posters and t-shirts and other paraphernalia meant to inspire people. Sometimes it is critiqued as an idealistic notion which could never really be completely achieved. In reality, the origin of this passage has nothing to do with the notions of happily ever after, nor is it an acknowledgement that living in a loving, committed relationship takes work and intention. Acts 18 verses 1 to 17 tells of the Apostle Paul in Corinth in 50 CE, founding a community of believers there along with Priscilla and Aquila. At that time, Corinth was a large city located in Greece, which was part of the Roman Empire. It had been destroyed in 146 BCE when the Romans overran it, but was rebuilt about 100 years later, most likely while Julius Caesar was emperor. It was an important location for trade between Rome and Asia. It had a population composed of Romans, Jews, and Greeks. Some people were involved in the imperial cult, but there were also synagogues. Estimates of the size of the population range from 100 to 600,000. After staying in Corinth for 18 months, Paul left to go to Ephesus. There seems to have been a first letter written to the community in Corinth while he was in Ephesus, but it has been lost. Paul wrote what we know as the first letter to the Corinthians in approximately 54 CE to address the quarrels that had been reported by Chloe's people. In chapter 5, verses 9 to 11, Paul writes, "I wrote to you in my letter not to associate with sexually immoral persons. But now I am writing to you not to associate with anyone who bears the name of brother or sister who is sexually immoral or greedy or is an idolater, reveler, drunkard, or robber." In other words, the situation had gotten worse, with a variety of bad behaviors breaking out and discrediting the movement. Apparently, there were divisions forming with followers clustering around different leaders in the community, such as Cephas, Peter, Apollos, and Paul. Not only that, but according to an article in the Christian Century magazine by Douglas Campbell, there were 15 issues that needed to be addressed within the community in Corinth. They included partisanship, with the Corinthians factionalizing behind rival leaders, incest, prostitution, celibacy within marriage, Christians married to one another asking about divorce, Christians married to pagans asking about divorce, questions surrounding marriage and remarriage, lawsuits, idolatry, concerns about women praying and prophesying in immodest ways, chaos in worship with speaking in tongues and competing voices, inequality in the communal meal, denials of the bodily resurrection of Jesus and of Christians, the collection of a large sum of money to be sent to Jerusalem, and a change in Paul's travel plans. He goes on to explain that underlying this mess there were four main difficulties. A basic failure in relating to one another in love. A dramatic failure of the local church leaders to act considerately in the face of their competition for status and influence. Arrogant theological reasoning that denied the importance of the body, which we might call Christian intellectualism, and tensions arising from the pressure that Paul's teachings about sex placed on his converts. Each of these problems would have been bad enough, but they were all present together. The combination was toxic. The passage chosen for today follows Paul's explanation in chapter 12 about different spiritual gifts and the ways that all can contribute to the overall functioning of a healthy community. His analogy of the community as a body and all the individuals as members of the one body, all necessary in one way or another, is beautiful. It is this diversity of gifts that will enable the community to flourish, but it is also the source of many disagreements. Chapter 13 is written as an ethic or code of conduct for the community as they struggle to live together. To be fair, the community of followers that was evolving was made up of people with vastly different backgrounds. Shirley Smith, a New Testament scholar, outlines this diversity. There were people who were married and unmarried, widows and children, converted Gentiles, also Jews who had been quite powerful in their former synagogues, such as Crispus and Sosthenes. Many were from the lower classes, but some were very wealthy, such as Crates, who had been a city treasurer, or Gaius, who could afford to underwrite Paul's ministry. Some were slaves, and some free. There was a lot going on in this community, and common courtesy and respect were lacking sometimes. But it was also this diversity that would enable this community to serve as a witness in the world to the power of God shown through the life, death, resurrection, and ascension of Jesus Christ. Sometimes our biggest weakness is also our greatest strength. Or perhaps we frame it as, what doesn't kill you makes you stronger. So what is the guiding principle that will hold all this together? Love. Not a light, non-committal kind of enjoying each other and getting along kind of love, or a feeling good, positive energy, we think so much alike kind of love. This is love of a different kind. Paul begins to write about what this love might look like. It is patient. It is kind. But then he switches to indicate what love is not. Because it is obvious that the way people are treating each other in real life or real time is the best way to talk about what is not acceptable. No use beating around the bush. So, because there is rivalry between factions, he says, love is not envious or boastful. And because there are major disagreements, he adds, love does not insist on its own way. Further, when we do not get our own way, or we feel like we are not on the winning team, we can become irritable or resentful. But that is not helpful in any way when we are trying to build a community. And so that is not love in action. Neither is rejoicing over another's misfortune, or worse, causing it. In order for love to be allowed a chance, for the community to try to bring love into reality, it is important to recognize together that love does not always seem practical or even reasonable. How can the gap be bridged between people who have had such radically different experiences? How can there be understanding? What level of commitment is required in order to achieve a working community that can make a lasting difference in the world? And so Paul lays it out. Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends. Elsewhere in his letter to the church in Ephesus, Paul says, I therefore, the prisoner in the Lord, beg you to lead a life worthy of the calling to which you have been called, with all humility and gentleness, with patience, bearing one another in love, making every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body and one Spirit, just as you were called to the one hope of your calling. One Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who is above all and through all and in all. What does it mean to bear all things? And let's be honest, why should we have to bear all things? Some things are by definition unbearable. But we are not talking here about circumstances. Rather, we are talking about the way we treat one another. Some of us deal with deep-seated prejudice, with hurtful remarks and looks, with unsolicited judgment pronounced by people who are woefully unqualified to make any assessment. And what purpose does it serve, other than to make someone feel somehow superior, more entitled, more worthy? I discovered quite a while ago that the best way to deal with people who are hurtful is to be gracious. always. Much like Jesus tells his disciples to turn the other cheek, not to get offended by another's behavior and react strongly. Do not take it personally or internalize it. That is the very reaction they expect. When they ask for your tunic, give them your coat also. By overextending your generosity and graciousness, you make them look bad in the eyes of others and perhaps, although there is no guarantee, feel guilty for the way they have treated you. Grace under fire. Calm. Remember that saying, the best revenge is living well? When people see you are not rattled by what they are doing, they are more likely to leave you alone and try to find someone else who will satisfy their need for superiority. In the words of Taylor Swift, shake it off. Love believes all things. I think what Paul is talking about here is the ability to believe that all things are possible. That good behavior from everyone is an achievable goal. Rather than being pessimistic about the prospect that lies before and thinking others are somehow not capable of living up to the same standards as we are, give them a chance. We may be surprised by what is possible when people genuinely can see that they are loved and accepted as part of the community. No need to impress or fear failure. Believe in one another and set a standard of acceptable behavior that everyone follows. And by that, Paul means everyone. Love hopes all things. When we establish expectations that are mediocre, we realize mediocrity. Paul is striving to proclaim the message of God's love and the meaning of the life, death, and resurrection of Jesus Christ to all. He had a mission and a message that he was dedicating his life to. He wanted everyone to come to an understanding of the God of the Jewish religion and to follow God's call into the future. He believed that Jesus embodied the love of God for each person, and that each person had something to share in the community to further the realm of God on earth. But in order to fully realize the future, sometimes it is necessary to talk foolishness, because we have not set our sights on God's things, but on human things. Love endures all things. The effort that the people would have to put into really changing their behavior was enormous. And as we know, unlearning old ways of thinking and behaving and replacing them with new ones is time-consuming and fraught with blunders and confusion. People will still get hurt and have to deal with prejudice and judgment. It is hard to shift from thinking the prodigal deserves any punishment the father can dish out, to recognizing how amazing the return really is. That no punishment is required, but rather a reintegration. Real change is difficult, and patience is necessary as people are given the opportunity to make significant adjustments to patterns. Love never ends. I recall when I was in university, I had one of those buttons you can pin on your coat or bag that read, "Love bears all things, believes all things, hopes all things, endures all things. Love never ends." My understanding of this was much different than it is today, but I still knew that these words set us an ideal to strive for. My political philosophy teacher, who was a man I admired, because he had introduced me to some of the classic thinkers whose work has survived for us, and opened my mind to so many new ideas, looked at it one day and said, "Love never ends." Do you really believe that? Sometimes love doesn't. This bothered me, but I knew he was thinking of romantic love, human love. Romantic love is fraught with all kinds of difficulties. I suspect he knew this from personal experience. Divorce and separation of families perhaps feels to people as if love does end. Nothing lasts forever, they say. But from a Christian perspective, God's love is always available to us, no matter what. No matter how far from the path we stray, God's love is still waiting for us when we return. And ideally, we want our love to be modeled on the love of God, unconditional. In practice, of course, conditions seem to come to mind quite naturally for others, not so much for ourselves. But God calls us to love one another as God has loved us. What a gift that is to our world, to be known and to be loved. That is what it means to live in community. We are known and we are loved. That can be uncomfortable at times and it can be messy. But the community in Corinth was already dealing with uncomfortable and messy. And they were in danger of breaking apart. Why not chance trying to love one another? Could it be any worse? There were many gifted people in Corinth, people who had the potential to spread the good news of the Messiah, people with gifts of healing, people with resources, people with great faith. But all the spiritual gifts in the world are not of any value if there is not love at the base. Paul wants the community in Corinth to come face to face with the real issues that threaten their existence. The truth is that there are many people with a variety of gifts to offer, but if they are all competing with one another, then the sound is jarring and hollow. Being skilled and capable will not mean anything if there is no basis for being together or to struggle to live into the promise. The very existence of that community is threatened by their lack of love. And so Paul is outlining for the people, especially those who would be leaders in the community, what it means to form community, what it means to struggle together to achieve something bigger than any one of them could accomplish alone. And instead of competing, what if they cooperated and used each other to build up rather than to tear down? None of them knew what the result of their collective work would look like, but it would bear the imprint of Jesus Christ, the one who came in love, bearing love and calling us to love. Love that is patient, love that is kind. I have said before that love is an act of the will, a decision to live in a certain way because of a belief that we are called to love one another as we have been loved. I think we are beginning to realize, once again, what it means to love, to truly intend the best for one another. Not because it makes us feel warm and cozy, but because we want to match our words and our actions, to wrestle with what love looks like in our world. It may not be without risk or trust, but it will be fulfilling. All our human machinations, grand palaces and skyscrapers, large saving accounts or wise investments, finest fashion or racy cars, all of it will pass away. For now, Paul says, we see as if in a mirror, which can distort and mask things. But then we will see face to face, clearly, without distortion. Now we know only in part, but then we will know fully. In the end, what will remain? Love, God's love. May our striving to bring that love into being here on earth bear fruit and be a part of the realization of God's realm fulfilled. Amen.